Last week we talked about being all in spiritually and how it's the secret to success in life and in the spiritual life in particular. We looked at King Asa in the Old Testament and how he was fully committed to God, and God blessed him with a huge success in a battle because of it. We looked at his latter life, and when he forgot that same principle, the river of blessings just dried up. Why? Because as the scripture says, the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. So today we're going to take a look at how being all in not only is the secret to success, but it's also the path to happiness. Not just being successful in life or in your spiritual life, but being happy. How many people in here want to be happy? Anyone? Any takers on that one? And I want to be happy. I want you to think about a time when you were incredibly happy. Can you think about a time? Maybe a month and a half ago or so. Maybe it's been okay. Are we on? Check, check. How are we doing now? Are we on? I thought it was working before. The power's on. Red light. Now green light. Wow. You're feeling pretty powerful right now. Maybe it's been a long time since you felt happy. This is always a touchy subject because for some people, it's been years. I mean, you really struggle with this issue. You're like, oh no, don't go talking about happy. That's a distant memory. That's 1983? Could have been 81. It's somewhere in there. I mean, it's been a long time. And for some of you, it may have been yesterday. Brushing your teeth. You're just fired up. It varies from personality to personality. But we're going to take a look at a guy who is incredibly happy and what he did to become that way, so that we can take a cue from him and try to develop a greater happiness in our life. Wouldn't that be awesome? Yeah. Whatever baseline we're starting from, just to increase our level of happiness. Now, here's the backstory. Elijah, the prophet, had just come off a huge win on Mount Carmel. And we're going to be talking about this in 2 weeks' time. He beat the 450 prophets of Baal and the other 400 prophets as well. But he only won a battle. He didn't win the entire war. So Queen Jezebel wants to kill him. She's like, you're dead. You are a dead man, Elijah. And he's like, uh-oh. And so he just takes off. He goes for 40 days, heads down into the desert, goes to Mount Sinai, and he is just having a major pity party. He's feeling so bad. And so we're going to pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 19. This is just the backstory. When Elijah heard it, now this is the voice of God, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with a sword. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael. Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him." Elijah was filled with fear, with depression, discouragement, self-pity, isolation. He's feeling like, I'm the only only prophet around. I'm the only believer. I'm just the last man standing, God. And God says, no, it's not that bad. Hang on there. Now, you may have walked into church feeling just like this. I'm not fired up. I'm not happy. My marriage is a mess. My personal life is not doing great. My grades are terrible. I'm just stinking it out. Well, even the great ones have bad days. Even the great ones aren't happy all the time. What's God's solution for Elijah? He says, go back and call people. Even though Elijah had won a huge battle, God reveals that permanent victories are solved not just by a one-off event, not just by singular events, but by people and by perseverance. It takes a lot of effort. So Elijah goes back, even though he's afraid. And here's what happens. We pick up the story in 1 Kings chapter 19 through 21. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, then I'll come with you. Go back, he said, what have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and become his servant. Now, I just want you to picture this scene, okay? Elijah's coming out of a huge depression. He's a deeply committed guy. He's full on for God, but he is coming out of a serious trough. And he goes and finds this young, eager guy, Elisha. And this guy is so fired up to follow him. And how many people have dogs? Anyone got dogs in here? Okay, remember when your dog was a puppy? Remember how eager that dog was? I mean, we've got a little pug named Rocky. And when anyone comes and visits, that dog, she does circles. She does circles, she does all sorts of sniffing. She wants to see what dogs you've been hanging out with. And she's so excited. Now that's the kind of image here of Elijah. Elisha, he's so excited to get this call. He's just all in from the get-go. It's like a total young pup. And if you've ever watched a movie where there's this classic scene where you've got the old grizzled guy, and then he takes on an apprentice who's like really eager, exactly the scene you see here. There's no way that Elijah could have seen how special this young man would become, how powerful he'd become, how much he'd surpass him in his impact. But what stood out immediately is that Elisha was all in from the get-go. And that attitude of being all in was the path and the key to him having a happy life. It's the reason why Elisha was so fired up and happy, because he was all in. And so Elisha was happy, but that led to being more all in. It's just a virtuous cycle. And so Elisha reveals the path to happiness. So we're gonna do a deep dive on these three scriptures. Okay, you guys ready to get into it? We got a lot to go through here. Going back to verse 19, Elijah went from there, found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Okay, unlike Elijah, I know the names are so similar. Okay, Elijah is the older, Elisha is the younger guy. Elisha was prosperous. When wealth was measured by how many animals you had, how many cattle you had, this guy was loaded. He was the son of a wealthy family. He's got 12 yoke of oxen, which 2 to a yoke, 24 head of cattle. And so it's not clear. He's either driving a huge chain of oxen, all 24, or else he's got 11 other servants driving 2 oxen, and he's driving the 12th pair. But in any case, this guy's got a lot. He's either doing super well or he's very wealthy. And he comes from a prosperous and functional family. How do we know that? Because he wants to say goodbye to him. He doesn't say, I don't care about mom and dad. I don't care. I mean, he wants to say goodbye to his family. So we know he's got a functional family to say goodbye to. What else can we know about Elisha? He's a hard worker. And happiness is connected to hard work. He's working hard. He's not just, directing traffic. But you got to go take care of that field. You do this field. He himself is driving a pair of oxen. God never calls an idle man or an idle woman. He's looking for people that are willing to work hard. And people who work hard tend to be a little happier. They're engaged. They're working. Whether fishermen, farmers, or tax collectors, God calls workers to change their work and work for him. And happiness comes from your calling. What's so cool is that Elisha was called by God through this man Elijah. God had told Elijah, I want you to go call Elisha. And he did that. When you feel called, it's exciting. When you feel like your life is making a difference, when you have a mission and purpose for why you're here on this planet, guess what? That ups your happiness level because you feel like it's not just a meaningless, pointless life I'm living. I'm here to make a difference. And that's what Elijah was giving this young man. He's saying, listen, I'm calling you to a mission. And he responded. What else? Happiness springs from adoption into the family of God. So, taking a look at the scene, he's plowing. Elisha went up to him, threw his cloak around him. He throws his cloak. What does that signify? Well, most commentators say that he's basically adopting him. He's becoming his apprentice, but he's adopting him. And it's similar to when you get baptized. When you get baptized into Christ, the Bible says you're clothed with Christ. You enter into the family of God. That's why baptism is so important, because that's when you get adopted into the family of God. Christ throws his cloak around you, but that's exactly what Elijah does for this man, Elisha. Now, do we have any Bible geeks out there? People just like to do a little deep dive into the Bible. Okay, I'm just going to do a little sidebar for you. This is totally bonus material. I really thought, do I want to include this? This is going out to you, okay? Let's talk about the clothes this guy wear. Now, Elijah was essentially a prophet who was a trendsetter in his clothing. How do we know that? Because he's got this uniform of a belt and a hairy garment that he wears. In fact, later on, when people are looking for this guy Elijah, because he's always in trouble, they replied, well, this guy had a garment of hair and a leather belt around his waist. The king said, oh, that was Elijah the Tishbite. They could tell who it was by what he wore. In Zechariah 13, verse 4, it says, on that day, every prophet will be ashamed of their prophetic vision. They will not put on a prophet's garment of hair in order to deceive. Elijah set a style for what it meant to be a prophet. He had a garment of hair. And that went all the way down to John the Baptist. In Mark chapter 1, verse 6, John wore clothing made of camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist. And he ate locusts and wild honey. Okay, now for some of you, you're like, why is he talking? Okay, I'm not really talking to you. I'm talking to the Bible geeks here. I'm talking to the people who'd be interested in that. Okay, that's why John the Baptist is the Elijah who was to come. And he looked like Elijah. He had that same wild man type appearance that Elijah had. So back to the story. Let's keep moving. Next scripture. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye. He said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? Happiness comes from making a decision. We're just going through here and figuring out, well, why was this guy so fired up? He's a very decisive person. He felt the call of God, and he immediately left what he was doing and ran after Elijah. There's a sense of joy. There's a sense of passion because of that decision. In fact, the word decide, let's just take a look at what this means. If you're a Spanish speaker, you know immediately de means off or from or of. Okay, that person is from something. And cedere, the Latin root, is to cut. So it literally means to cut off, to decide. That's what decide means. So cutting off everything except the things that matter most. That's exactly what this guy did. He just basically said, my whole life is done. I'm leaving it behind and I'm going with this man, Elijah. He's so decisive. Now, let's look at a few synonyms of this word decide. Like resolution, result, outcome, determination. And the opposite meaning is procrastination, postponement, and delay. How do these states of mind affect your feelings? When you're toggling between something, when you're delaying a decision, when you're procrastinating on something you need to do, does that make you happy? Do you go, oh, I just love to wait. I know I need to decide, I should call that person back, but I can't do it right now. Does that leave you a deep sense of peace and contentment? No, you're like, oh, I gotta make a decision. But when you decide, when you cut things off and just go, boom, I'm doing it, you feel happier because you're decisive. Now, some of you, let's talk about this. Are you decisive when God calls you to act? And I want to ask you, take a look inside, because this may be a reason why you're not experiencing a lot of joy and happiness right now. Because part of you really feels like God's calling me. I know it. I know He's calling me. But at the same time, I don't want to decide right now. Ooh. And so you are in that gray zone where you haven't decided just to cut it off and go forward. And that explains one of the reasons why you may not be as happy as you'd want to be. What else? In a related point, happiness comes when your priority is clear. This guy loved his mom and dad. And he said, I want to go back and say goodbye to him. Totally fine. But he loved God and God's mission more than his mom and dad. Misplaced priorities can lead to missed opportunities. We end up loving our family first. Or maybe we've got a romantic attachment. We're really crazy about this person. And we want God, but we also want this relationship super bad. And we feel like they're maybe in opposition. Guess what? That causes psychic tension. And it can keep us from serving God. I've seen a lot of people walk away from their spiritual walk because of a romantic relationship, or because a family member wasn't happy with them going down that road. Have you ever seen that happen? Absolutely. This guy said, listen, I just need to say goodbye to my family, and I'm ready to go. When I became a Christian, my family thought I was nuts. My mom, I love my mom, she said, you're a zombie. You don't have a brain anymore. She literally snapped her fingers in front of me. Wake up, honey, wake up. And I'm like, wow, I'm okay. It was tough to decide to become a committed Christian when I was receiving that kind of challenge from the people I cared about the most. Are you willing to lay your relationship with a person or family member on the altar and say, you know what? God comes first. That's one of the toughest decisions you'll probably ever make. What else? Happiness comes when you count the cost and choose freely. In this passage, let's go back to the scripture, please. Okay, he says, I'm gonna go with you. Just let me say goodbye real quick. He says, go back. What have I done to you? Now that's a funny phrase. We don't use that word. What have I done to you? But what it really means is, listen, just do as you please. Whatever, dude. Just, you make a choice. It's up to you. That would be like a better translation of what he's saying here. God was calling Elisha during one of the darkest periods of Israel's history. Ahab and Jezebel were reigning. I mean, this is like the worst time. These are the worst people in power. This Ahab is definitely the worst. Believers were hard to find. Now, Elijah thought, I'm the last one standing, but he actually had 7,000 scattered throughout the nation who were still faithful to God. But he felt like, man, there's hardly anybody who seems faithful. And it was dangerous. Elijah was a wanted man by the government. So to call him at this time, it was a huge commitment on Elisha's part. And so what did Elijah say to him? He basically said, dude, count the cost. This ain't going to be easy. You're living a very comfortable, placid existence with your family, with a lot of wealth, and you're going to follow me, a guy in a hairy shirt and a leather belt, and I might be dead tomorrow. And you come with me, you might be dead tomorrow. Only when you decide to follow God with your eyes open can you really be happy. Because if you do it for your family, your friends, or for other people, in the long term, you're going to fall away. You're going to get resentful. I want to talk to you if you grew up in the church, if you're in your teens. It can be tempting to feel like, I gotta do this, I gotta be a Christian because my family, they're all committed Christians. And you feel this tension. But here's the thing. Do as you please. It's not easy to be a disciple on your high school campus, is it? It's tough to stand out and to stand up for what's right. It's tough to say no when everyone's saying yes. It's tough to be able to say, hey, that's not right, I'm not going to do that. When everyone else says, what's the problem? It takes guts. It takes conviction. And it's so much easier to just go along. Go to church on Sunday, but during the week, you're just like everybody else. And that's why your parents, they can't force you to be disciples. They can't make you. No one can. Nobody can. And in fact, if you go along without really making your own decision, later you're going to come to hate church, family, religion, the minister, everybody associated, because you did something that you hadn't counted the cost to do. Being all in is an inside game. What you don't hear Elijah saying is, dude, you need to burn that plow, you need to kill those cows, then you need to follow me, pronto. That's the rule. He just says, hey, you do as you please. When you're struggling with attitudes towards people who are calling you higher in your growth group, hey, you need to come on Wednesday. We're going to meet on Wednesday. When you're struggling with attitudes towards people calling you to a higher standard, it's a sign that you haven't decided or that you've stopped going all in. Because outwardly there's this culture of doing stuff, but inwardly you're like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm done with that. I'm not feeling it, Joe. And so you get caught. We're like, I don't want to.
Talk about it.
Church, going to church, having a discipling relationship, sharing your faith, maintaining a righteous lifestyle, living a pure life, not sleeping around, loving to serve other people. Other people can ask you to do these things, but ultimately, you've got to decide, I want to. That's the only time at which you'll actually become happy. Because if someone else is bossing you, then that reveals the problem that you've got your parking brake on. You're just like, nope, I don't want to. And you can go along a while for that, but ultimately you'll bail out at some point because you're like, I don't like living this way. Now here's the thing. If other people are living that way, don't try to drag them down to your standard. Okay, why does everyone need to be so fired up? Why? Because God is all in. That's the way God's nature is. He's totally all. Jesus is all in for you. And so we need to maintain an attitude, hey, we're all in for God. Can I get an amen on that? Do as you please. Whether you're an older person, whether you're a teenager, you choose. This is your life. No one can make you follow God. Let's go on to the next scripture. We got real quiet in here. Real quiet. Okay. Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. We're digging through this passage to find out what was the key to this guy's happiness. Well, one thing we can see here, happiness comes from burning the plow. Elisha does not leave a back door or an exit strategy. He burns the means of his livelihood. And he slaughters his oxen. I mean, this just guy, he just goes nuts here. I'm sure his parents were like, probably can keep the, we could probably use that in the future. Okay, all right, whatever. But let's compare this to Luke chapter 9, because it's a very similar feel. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus is calling people to follow him, just like Elijah was calling Elisha. But look at the difference. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 61, still another said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Jesus replied, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Okay, what's the difference? Elisha said, I want to go back and say goodbye to my family, and everything was fine. This guy said pretty much the same thing, and Jesus said, no. There's something different. And this is something we talked a few months ago about, where you really need to watch your butt. What happens here is it says, I'll follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. When you start using that word but, when it comes to your spiritual life, then problems start happening. This but negates everything before it. And I mentioned this before, but it's like if you're in a conversation with your girlfriend. And she says, how do I look? And you say, you look good, but... Or if your wife says, do you think I'm fat? No, but, okay, once you say but, you've just basically ruined everything. You just totally gone down the wrong road. How about if your girlfriend says, oh, you're so strong and handsome, but, okay, are you going to remember the part about the strong and handsome part? You're like, no, she thinks I'm a total weakling. Or I forgive you, but. This person in this story with Jesus was not willing to let go of the past and focus on God's call and mission. But Elisha burned his plow and he closed the door on his past. There's no happiness in your life without sacrifice. Let me say that again. There's no happiness without sacrifice. It's been said, you can't steal second base with your foot on first. And that's what some of us are trying to do. Yeah, we want God. We want the good feelings that go with it. We want to go. Anyone want to go to heaven? Heck yeah. I want to be there like little wings and stuff. And woo, woo. Playing some music, doing some fun stuff, living forever. No tears. It'd be awesome. At the same time, we don't want to give up anything for it. We want to go out and party on Friday, Saturday. We want to get hammered. We want to take our hangover into church on Sunday. And we want to not miss anything that this world has to offer. And so we don't want to close the door on our old life. We don't want to burn that plow. Do you have an exit strategy? Are you planning on leaving soon? If things don't work out with God in the church, are you ready to take off? Do you have a plan B? If you decide not to follow God? If so, you're going to have a really tough time being happy. Because you're going to always be toggling between two desires. The desire for God and spiritual happiness, and the desire for the world that's calling you always backwards. When you go through tough times spiritually, you'll just think, I want to go back to the way things used to be. I'm leaving, I'm moving, I'm leaving this small group. I'm going back to my old life. I don't want this anymore. What's your exit strategy? Do you have one? Or have you really burned the plow? Happy people close the door on the past and say, I'm with God through thick and thin. He goes on, he decides to serve. Let's go back to the passage in verse 21. He became a servant. Even though he came from a very privileged background, you see here, he's not entitled at all. He goes and serves this kind of wild man who comes out of nowhere. Elijah was a man who was living in caves, living under trees, basically homeless. Elisha came from a totally different background. But Elisha chose to serve. And I love what Albert Schweitzer says here in this quote. He said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. You know, when I see happy people in the church, it's typical, it's normal that that person is also a serving person. They're doing stuff, they're helping other people. And happiness is a complex subject. There's no easy answers for it. But usually, service is some component of a happy life. And so I want to ask you, are you willing to serve? Or do you feel so entitled, like, no way. I'll let other people serve me, that's it. Elisha reveals a secret. He says, I'm here to serve you. And then happiness comes when you value spiritual relationships and pursue mastery. He follows Elijah. He just attaches himself to this guy. And he recognized that mastery spiritually comes from learning from a master. When you start growing spiritually, it's exciting. When you start changing and leaving your old life, it was just so thrilling. I came from such a worldly background, totally worldly, totally in sin, immorality, drunkenness. If there's something I did, I've done it. I mean, just lots of stuff. So when I started to throw out all the sin in my life, it felt so awesome to finally make a change. And it brought an intense sense of happiness as I started to change and grow on the inside. Elisha followed someone else and became a master himself. He was inseparable from this man from then on. These two are like one of the greatest teams of history, Elisha and Elijah. The only thing that could separate their friendship was God himself, literally. Take a look. Later in life, after he follows this guy, Elijah, and this is when now Elijah is an amazing guy. Why? Because he doesn't die. Okay, there's only a few people in the Bible that don't die. Elijah's one of them. The other one's a guy named Enoch. Okay, these people, they don't die. They get translated up into heaven. I don't know why they use that word, but it's translate. Basically, you go from earth and you just whoop, hit the escalator and you go straight up into heaven. It's pretty awesome. So take a look at how Elijah translates into heaven. When they crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you? Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, Elisha replied. You've asked a difficult thing, Elijah said. Yet, if you see me when I'm taken from you, it'll be yours. Otherwise, it will not. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. What an awesome passage. God, these two were so tight spiritually. These guys had the friendship of all time. They're so close. I mean, Elijah is trying to just lose his buddy. Like, dude, I'm going to be taken from you today. He's like, nope, I'm sticking with you. He's like, hey, why don't you go over there? Nope, not doing it. And then he says, what kind of a blessing do you want? I said, I want a double portion of your spirit. He says, well, you'll have to be with me if that's going to happen. Otherwise, it's not. So God comes in a chariot of fire, and he just drives it right between them. And he literally separates the two because nothing else could separate their relationship. Pretty awesome. And then the cloak, the hairy garment, remember I talked about that earlier, picks it up and he splits the water. Just boom, little parting of the Red Sea right there on the Jordan River. He received a double spirit of Elijah, and he did twice as many miracles as his master Elijah. Elijah did around 14. Elisha, if you read it, he does about 28. Now, I had a list, and I was going to just read them. I'm not going to. Take your time, dig through it. I mean, they just did all sorts of, he's just crazy with the miracles. He definitely inherits a double portion of the spirit of Elijah. It's pretty amazing. But why? Because he committed himself to mastery through building spiritual relationships. And this is something we talk about in our church, discipling relationships. And I want to ask you, are you pursuing spiritual mastery? Or are you just like, I just want to go to church? I'm just here for church, that's it. I'm just here to sit, learn a few things, and then go on with my life. Listen, you're missing a huge opportunity to be incredibly happy if you'll pursue mastery spiritually. To become in the image of Jesus Christ. Do you have a spiritual friend or mentor in your life that you're attached to? Some of us are like, I don't want it, I don't need it, don't get in my face, you stay away from me, I'm good as I am. If I want spiritual mastery, I'll watch a video on YouTube. But I don't need anyone in my life. You're missing out on the path to happiness. Because you're not close to people. These two, they had an amazing friendship that led to some incredible miracles. And some of us have just abandoned that aspect of Christianity, which is having someone in your life as a friend and a mentor. Going back to our verse 21, he burned the plowing equipment, cooked the meat, gave it to the people, and they ate. His calling is totally celebrated by a party, and they all ate. There's so much joy and celebration. Everyone's eating, everyone's happy, because Elisha was all in, and that resulted in happiness and joy. They just have an awesome party. It's not just that Elisha was naturally happy. He was doing things that led to happiness. And this is where some of us can go, well, that's just who he was. That's not who I am. I'm not a happy person. No. If you work hard, if you live for a calling or a mission, if you accept grace into your life, a spiritual adoption, if you make decisions quicker, if you have clear priorities, if you start counting the cost and choose freely to follow God, if you start burning the plow, if you decide to serve, if you have spiritual relationships, if you pursue mastery, if you do any of these things, or just even a fraction of them, I can tell you for sure, you're going to take a step in the direction of happiness. Even if you are really challenged in this area and you're really struggling, even as you hear this, you can be going in the right direction by doing things that will lead to happiness. Are you all in today? If not, maybe that's contributing to you not being happy. Do you want to be happy? It's not a feeling, it's a decision.
Wow.
To do things that lead to contentment. I want to call you today to make a decision to go all in. That's our theme for the entire month. Because sometimes it takes a little while to decide. It's a big decision to go all in. But I want to challenge you by the end of the month, decide I'm going to be all in my relationship with God, not partially, because being in the middle is miserable. What would your life be like, your job, your small group, this church, if everyone in it was totally all in? Wouldn't it be amazing? It'd be awesome to come to. So let me leave you with some next steps. Burn the plow. Let go of your spiritual exit strategy. Some of you have one. Let it go. Number 2, find a mentor or a spiritual friend, a discipler, and commit to learning and friendship. Don't be a Lone Ranger Christian. Number 3, go all in spiritually and become a true Christian. We've got some books in the back that'll help guide you through the studies. And get with a disciple and say, hey, listen, teach me how to be all in for Christ. Thank you so much.